So, let's get down to business. In the case that you've been living under a rock, there are a lot of unprecedented things going on in the world and in this country right now. I'm going to take a moment to address the racial discourse in this country, the protests, riots, and the federal troops. 1. America's issue with race and its economic puppet master. The United States has a long and unfortunate history of racism and unmatched prejudice at the expense of minorities, particularly black people. This is obviously true. It is also true that there are still dated systems in place that predominantly hurt the black community the most. Think the crack epidemic, the broken welfare system, school-to-prison pipeline, and war on drugs. However, to say that these only hurt the black community is a stretch. These systems in place are designed to hold people in poverty down, keep the poor struggling and working day and night just to survive, and when they expectedly do break the law, which poverty has time in and time out shown to cause, punch them fast and hard and use American classism as justification. They were just dirty poor criminals, after all. They make the schools teach valueless things instead of crucial basics such as financial fitness, all while the American financial system is designed to survive and benefit off of financial incompetence. The systems in place of the United States are just designed almost like a secret club, where only those educated in its inner workings have the necessary info to succeed and prosper without pure luck being on their side. This country hates poor people, and the unfortunate truth is a disproportionate number of black people are in poverty as a result of past policy designed to hold them down, whose effects we still see today after removal of said policy because the whole system is designed to trap the impoverished in poverty forever, like an ant trying to escape an antlion trap. The shackles holding minorities down is through economics. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong. Money is what makes the world go round. A rich black person has far less in common with a poor black person, than a poor white person does. Take policing. Right now, there's a mass movement addressing overly aggressive and unnecessary policing, particularly in the inner cities where black people live. It's easy to look at the numbers and simply assume that there's nothing going on other than blatant racism because of racial profiling by police in areas. This, however, ignores the fact that police will eye any demographic that predominantly commits the most crime in said area with suspicion. Doing my best not to parrot the whole despite making up 13% BS, it's an undeniable fact that the black population of America commits a disproportionate amount of crime in the United States. This is, of course, not because they're black, and I can't stress that point enough since racists somehow try to use this as some sick justification for their hate. It's because they have such a high rate of poverty. It makes at least some sense, although it is very unfair, for a police officer in an area of high crime by the same demographic to be more wary and suspicious of said demographic. But this does not only hurt innocent black people. If you go to some random place in Trailer Park, USA, the police will look down on and target the biggest criminal offending demographic in that area. In this case, poor white rednecks who can be involved in illegal activities from moonshining to cooking meth. What's the connection here? There will always be, in our current system, a target on whatever group of poor people that exists in the US. Focusing back onto racism in the United States, think of all the horrible stereotypes that black people use as justification for prejudice by racists today. Yes, some have existed since the days of slavery to dehumanize black people altogether, but the vast majority are stereotypes that when you take a step back, you realize are really describing poor people. In order to effectively remove these harmful stereotypes, we must focus on bringing everyone in poverty out of the hole altogether. Once we can reduce the negative effects and numbers of poverty in the US, much of the harmful racist rhetoric will melt away with it, as the fuel for said rhetoric will essentially be taken away. This kills a few birds with one stone. It will immediately help the black community rise out of poverty and live safer, happier, and less fearful lives, change backwards ideas on race and action being correlated, avoid the resistance against the movement by white people of the fellow working class, and help everyone in the US of all groups to be freed from the shackles of American finance that gatekeep millions from achieving the American dream. We need to attack racism with race-blind economics and see the root tool used to hold down exploited communities. I don't mean affirmative action and reparations. I mean affordable healthcare, livable wages, easily accessible and affordable financial health, and most importantly, a working, effective, and evenly funded public school system. In the end, we are all human, trying to claw our way at our dream of a roof over our heads, a family to love, and food to keep us full overnight. Dividing this similarity of the same working class by race does nothing but hurt people of all races. In the end, enables the same broken system to hurt the same vulnerable groups. The protest and BLM, in the wake of the brutal murder of Mr. Floyd, there have been waves of continuous angry protests across the country. Many want to tear down the whole system altogether because they see it as unfixable. It's kind of weird for me to say this because I tend to be nihilistic about humanity. I still maintain a romantic optimism about the beauty of our flawed nature, however. But I don't agree with this sentiment. There has been this preaching of learn your history, toted by people whom, for the most part, have just learned for what seems like the first time the actual horrors of mankind and what has been done in the past. I'll be the first to admit, part of me is genuinely amused at this passion for history, but I can't help but shake the feeling that in an effort to show the whole picture of the history that we were taught, people still fail to recognize the actual whole picture. I remember when I first learned about the Holocaust and the gas chambers as a 5-year-old, the horror of nuclear weapons as a 4-year-old, and living nightmares of Japanese war crimes in China as a 5th grader, all by means of my own studies. Because of my early exposure to these things, I've become far more objective and unsurprised by everything that has happened in America's dark past. It boggles my mind that people would be surprised by the notion that the CIA planted crack to hurt the black community when the Tuskegee experiments were a thing even before. But no group is innocent of these horrors, and I'll speak a little more on that when addressing BLM. What I'm trying to say is looking so much at the negative as a new scholar of history can completely ruin your perception of the world and create a sense of helplessness. And to that, I have to stress how much positive change has happened in recent history. Only 60 years ago, it was illegal for a white and black man to share a drinking fountain, and less than 200 years ago, people were legally enslaved in physical chains as property rather than humans. The fact that we've been able to reverse these legal policies in the past is monumental. We have work to do, but to give up now and destroy the system would waste hundreds of years of progress that have been in the making. Let's take the defund the police movement. Some interpret this as shrink the force considerably to only react to necessary cases and use the excess funding for social programs. Others, on the more extreme end, want to abolish the concept of a police force altogether, firmly believing that ample social services will render police obsolete. I have 2 points to counter this. For one thing, the transition into having effective and established social services will take time, and the imminent increase in crime as a result would be horrifying. The second point is that this really assumes that all criminals are formed as a result of their surroundings and upbringing, and they're all within the realm of rehabilitation, which just isn't true. While our handling of people with mental illness is unjust and harmful, there is no denying that people with extreme cases of mental illness still have the ability to commit heinous acts of violence, as well as religious and political extremists, rapists, and more. There will always be a need to have some trained, armed, and readily available force to deal with this, and there will always be cases of immediate lethal force being necessary, especially since guns are a constitutional right for citizens, which is a good thing. A good fix for this to be 1, shrink the police force and to not use them for nonviolent crimes and to not arrest nonviolent offenders while funding social programs, which a lot of people agree on. But abolishing them? No. Now, to address the big point in all this, BLM or Black Lives Matter. I'll make it clear now that I'm not a part of the All Lives Matter crowd, which is basically a gross justification of racism. I'll make it clear we're focusing on Black lives right now because they're the ones suffering most, clearly as a result of our institution, and have suffered for the longest out of any demographic in the U.S., barring Native Americans, which is a whole different story. All that being said, I have strong issues with BLM. For one, the claim that it isn't political, with some going as far as saying things such as, this is not an organized movement or organization, which just isn't true, and is a sign of moral elitism. The policies being called into action by BLM are inherently political. The fundraising method, Act Blue, is inherently political, being used as a fundraising tool for Democrats and in particular progressives. The original demands of BLM, yes, there are a specific set of demands, call for reparations and independent black political power. The whole point and implementation of BLM is political, and when they say it's just human rights, not politics, it's really a cheap excuse to try to delegitimize any opposition and to justify every point of BLM. You cannot stay on your high horse and simply say, if you don't agree, you're just a racist, now get the fuck out. This dismissive attitude is both immature and counterproductive. Because of this, I believe that Black Lives Matter, and I'll say that, Black Lives Matter. However, I'm not a part of Black Lives Matter. I firmly stand by my belief that reparations and race-focused changes are not the way to go, and I see the fundraising system of BLM being directly linked to political movements as absolutely disheartening. You can't claim to be an apolitical movement when you're so clearly politically charged with a specific set of political actions that you're pushing for. This leads me to another point: hate against white people. Go with whatever definition of racism as you please. Prejudice and hate against white people is just as idiotic and backwards as racism against black people. It's the same key tools in play: the overgeneralizations of entire demographics of people purely off of your image and personal experiences with individuals. And to say that BLM is free of any prejudice is false. There is a considerable number of members of the movement, including one of its founders, who actively post and speak hate on white people, with the justification either being, they're the ones in power so it's fine, or even worse, we only mean this select group of white people do this, after saying something generally like, I hate white people, or any other gross grouping of them. That would be like me saying I hate black people, and when I'm actually pressed about it, responding, I meant that I hate black people that are active in gangs and hurting their communities, not all of them. I don't care what you say. It is the same goddamn pseudo-logic that is just hate in disguise and the worst and ignorant double standards at best. I'll also point out that demonization of white people, and yes, this is an actual thing, accomplishes nothing productive and will do nothing but push people to a more extreme side. If I hate someone for no logical reason, the color of my skin and the whiteness of theirs does not justify that hate. The issue with these race-based movements is their inherently divisive nature. No matter how much you try to say, we're not saying that you didn't experience hardships, we're just saying race wasn't a factor, you're still inherently ostracizing a group that you could benefit from support the most: the blue-collar white Americans that voted against their best interests for Trump. I know it's just a comedy sketch, but do watch the SNL sketch of Black Jeopardy with Tom Hanks. Yes, it's an exaggerated joke, but the point still stands true. Poor white Americans and poor black Americans have far more in common with each other than differences. This is why I'm in favor of class reductionism, pushing for us to holistically solve our economic inequality, as I fully believe that will have the most immediate and positive impact for the largest number of people. BLM. Support the statement and the reasoning for said statement. Do not support the movement. It's divisive, overly race-focused, overly and hypocritically political, and unfortunately, in rare extreme cases, enables hate. Now, after saying all that, I know some of y'all folks might feel like I'm some bootlicker bowing down to what's happening in Portland right now. Yes, I've had far more patience for the police force and the responsive protests and riots than others, and I stand by the fact that the violent rioting is dumb and the excuses made for looting are pathetic. But the move to send in federal troops into the city outright violates the rights of Americans with no accountability is horrible. I condemn Trump for falling into the very trap that the left has parroted he will for years. Trump is vastly overstepping his executive power and is showing similarities that we have historically seen in dictators. Sending in unmarked federal troops in vans is not a good look. In fact, it sounds like something straight out of China. And people supporting this move are going against their own values. The same conservatives always screaming states' rights and local government are praising these federal troops for keeping the peace, proving that their ideals are only skin deep and that they will only stand for their beliefs when it benefits their respective ideology. Let's take the Second Amendment. As a strong left-leaning person, I've had countless backlash for being adamantly pro-gun. I believe this is a perfect case of why the Second Amendment is so important and people need to arm themselves against federal tyranny, such as the federal occupation of Portland. But the same groups who always claim that guns are to protect against tyranny are silent now. It doesn't benefit their agenda, so they'll stay silent. The left is just as guilty, always screaming for gun control left and right, but praising any black man open carrying a rifle, saying that it's different because they're protecting their community. No shit, that's the whole damn point of the Second Amendment. Stop with the double standards. To the people on the right, we're experiencing a first-hand justification for the Second Amendment in defense of federal tyranny, so start supporting gun ownership like you say you would. And to the left, stop being anti-gun. For folks on the far left, all I'm going to say is, under no pretext, but for the liberals, y'all need guns. Don't claim that they're what makes this country bad one moment and then go out and support specific people owning guns because it benefits you. In conclusion, I denounce the Trump presidency and its idiotic actions, but I also denounce this race-driven mob mentality that will accomplish no net overall positive. The issue of racism in America is great, but it is only enabled because of classism, something that every race is guilty of perpetuating. I'm running out of time, y'all, so if y'all want more, I'll make a YouTube channel.